The Viking Age, a calm history of exploration and mythology. Soothing bedtime stories. Close your eyes and let your mind drift away, back through the centuries, carried on the gentle currents of time. We are going to a place of deep, quiet fjords and towering, silent mountains, a time when the world felt both vast and intimately known. This is the age of the Norse people, but we will not linger on the clash of steel or the cries of battle. Instead, we will seek the quiet heart of their world, the rhythm of their daily lives, the spirit of their craftsmanship, and the boundless wonder that called them across the open sea. Our story begins in a long, narrow finger of water that reaches deep into the heart of Norway. The fjord is called Stillhaven, the quiet harbor. Its waters are the color of polished jade, so clear you can see the smooth, round stones on the bottom far below. On either side, mountains rise like sleeping giants, their slopes cloaked in a thick blanket of pine and birch trees. Waterfalls, thin as silver threads, cascade down the dark rock faces, their distant murmur a constant, soothing hum that blends with the whisper of the wind in the trees. Here, nestled in a small, grassy cove where a freshwater stream meets the salt water of the fjord, lies a small settlement. It is not a bustling town, but a handful of long houses, their turf roofs thick with grass and wildflowers, making them look like natural extensions of the land itself. Smoke curls lazily from the smoke holes in their roofs, carrying the scent of pine wood and roasting meat on the cool, clean air. In this peaceful place lives a man named Leif. Leif is not a king or a great warrior. He is a shipbuilder and a master of his craft. His hands, though strong and calloused, move with a gentle precision, for he believes that the spirit of the tree lives on in the wood he shapes. His hair and beard are the color of sun-bleached driftwood, and his eyes are the gray-blue of the sea on a calm morning. He is a quiet man, one who listens more than he speaks, preferring the language of the axe, the adze, and the plane. With Leif is his family. His wife, Astrid, has hair the color of spun gold and a smile as warm as the summer sun. She is a weaver, her fingers as skilled with the loom and shuttle as Leif's are with his tools. She creates cloth not just for warmth but for beauty, weaving patterns that tell stories of the seasons, of the great world tree, Yggdrasil, and of the stars that guide sailors home. They have 2 children. Their son, Bjorn, is 10 winters old, with his father's steady gaze and an insatiable curiosity about the world beyond the fjord. Their daughter, Freya, is 7, with her mother's bright hair and a spirit as gentle as a fawn. She loves to listen to the stories of the land, the secrets whispered by the wind and the water. For the past year, a great work has been underway on the shore, just beyond their longhouse. It is this work that occupies Leif's days and fills his dreams at night. He is building a ship. Not a fearsome warship with a snarling dragon's head, but a different kind of vessel, a *Nar, a sturdy, deep-bellied merchant ship designed for long voyages across the open ocean. He has named her the Fjord Wanderer. The story of the Fjord Wanderer began not with the swing of an axe, but with a walk deep into the forest that climbed the mountainside. Leif and a young Bjorn went together, walking for days, their footsteps muffled by a carpet of fallen pine needles. Leif was not just looking for trees, he was listening to them. He would lay a hand on the rough bark of a towering oak, close his eyes, and feel the deep, slow life within it. He was searching for trees that had grown straight and strong, trees that had weathered 100 winters and drunk deeply of the sun. These trees, he knew, had the strength and spirit to become the backbone of a ship that could face the great ocean. He found his keel tree first, a magnificent oak that stood alone in a sun-dappled clearing. It was ancient, its branches reaching towards the sky like gnarled arms, Leif made an offering of thanks to the spirit of the forest, a small carving of a boat left at its roots, before he and his kinsmen carefully felled it. The sound of their axes was a sharp, rhythmic counterpoint to the forest's deep silence, and when the great tree finally fell, it was with a sigh that seemed to shake the very ground. For months, the great log lay seasoning, slowly and carefully, protected from the rain and the harshest sun. Leif visited it daily, watching as the wood settled, releasing its moisture, becoming lighter and stronger. During this time, other trees were chosen with equal care. Tall, straight pines for the mast and yardarm, their wood flexible and resilient. More oaks, their wood dense and resistant to the sea's rot, were sought for the ribs and hull planks. And from the deep woods, they sought out naturally curved timbers, roots and branches that had grown in the exact shape needed for the ship's frame, so that the wood's own strength would be preserved, its grain flowing with the lines of the vessel. Now, a year later, the ship has taken shape on the shore. It rests in a cradle of logs, its proud, curving stem and stern posts reaching for the sky like the horns of a crescent moon. The long keel, a single, perfect piece of oak, forms its spine. To this, Leif and his helpers have painstakingly attached the ribs, each one shaped by steam and pressure, coaxed into a graceful curve that will give the ship its strength and its beautiful, flowing lines. The air is filled with the clean, sharp scent of wood shavings and hot tar. The sounds are rhythmic and soothing. The steady tap-tap-tap of wooden mallets driving pegs into place, the long, satisfying shar of a smoothing plane sliding over a plank, the gentle lapping of the fjord's water against the shore. Bjorn sits on a nearby log, watching his father work. Leif is fitting a strake, one of the long planks that will form the ship's hull. This is a task of immense skill. Each plank must overlap the one below it perfectly, in what is called a clinker-built style. The planks, called strakes, are hewn thin, just a thumb's width, to make the ship light and flexible, allowing it to bend and ride with the waves rather than fighting against them. Leif holds the long, shaped plank against the ribs. He squints, his head tilted, his eyes tracing the line it makes. He is not just looking at the wood, he is feeling its tension, its willingness to bend. He makes a small mark with a piece of charcoal, then takes the plank down again. With a small, sharp adze, he shaves away a sliver of wood, no thicker than a leaf. He fits it again. He repeats this process over and over, a patient, meditative dance of fitting, marking, and carving. There is no rush. The ship will be ready when it is ready. To hurry such work would be to offend the spirit of the wood and to invite the ill will of the sea. While Leif works, Astrid is engaged in her own great task. In a small sunlit shed, her loom stands tall. She is weaving the sail for the fjord wanderer. For months, she and the other women of the settlement have been spinning wool from their hardy, long-fleeced sheep. The wool was washed in the cold, clear stream, combed until it was soft as a cloud, and then spun into strong, even yarn. Astrid dyed the yarn herself, using plants gathered from the surrounding meadows and forests. Goldenrod and onion skins for warm yellows and golds, woad for the deep blue of the twilight sky, and madder root for a rich, earthy red. Now, she weaves these colors into a great square of cloth. The rhythmic clatter of the loom is a comforting sound, a kind of music that has been made in this fjord for generations. She is weaving a pattern of interlocking squares in red and white, a bold design that will be visible from a great distance at sea. In the center, she is carefully weaving a symbol in blue thread, a compass, the Vegvasir, a rune of guidance, said to ensure that one who carries it will never lose their way, even in storms or bad weather. The sail is more than just a tool to catch the wind. It is a promise, a prayer, a story woven in wool. It holds the warmth of the sheep, the color of the earth, and the hopes of the people who made it. As Astrid's shuttle flies back and forth, she hums a low, ancient tune, a song about the sun's journey across the sky and the moon's pull on the tides. Freya sits at her mother's feet, playing with scraps of colored yarn. She arranges them on the floor, making her own patterns, her own small stories. She is learning the feel of the wool, the magic of color, just as Bjorn is learning the feel of wood and the secrets of a well-balanced tool. The days in Stillhaven are long and gentle as the seasons turn. Summer is a time of endless light, when the sun barely dips below the horizon, and the fjord is alive with the flash of jumping fish and the cries of gulls. The family works from sunrise to the long, lingering twilight. They tend their small garden, growing hardy greens, turnips, and barley. They fish in the fjord, smoking and salting their catch to preserve it for the winter. They gather berries from the hillsides and mushrooms from the damp, mossy floor of the forest. In the evenings, they gather outside their longhouse. Leif will sit and carve, perhaps a small wooden horse for Freya or a new handle for a tool, the shavings falling like soft curls at his feet. Astrid will mend clothes or spin more yarn, her spindle whirling in a steady, hypnotic dance. Bjorn and Freya will chase fireflies in the twilight, their laughter echoing softly in the quiet air. They speak of their plans, but not with anxiety or fear. They speak of a land to the west, a place they have only heard of in tales from sailors who have been blown off course. A land of fire and ice, a place of new beginnings. They are not fleeing from anything. They are not seeking riches or conquest. They are drawn by a quiet pull, a desire to see what lies beyond the horizon, to build something new with their own hands, to give their children a wider world. The Sword Wanderer is not a vessel of escape, but a vessel of hope. As summer deepens, the ship grows. The hull is fully planked, each strake fastened to the next with iron rivets, their ends hammered flat over a small, square plate called a rove. Between the overlapping planks, they pack a mixture of tar and sheep's wool, a process called caulking, to make the hull watertight. The inside of the ship is a beautiful skeleton of arching ribs and smooth curving wood. It smells of pine, tar, and the sea. One day, Leif announces that it is time to step the mast. This is a momentous occasion. The mast, a single magnificent pine tree, has been stripped of its bark and shaped until it is perfectly round and smooth. It is so long that it takes 10 men to carry it to the ship. They guide the base of the mast towards a huge block of oak set into the keel, the mast step, or curling, which means old woman in their tongue, for it is this block that will hold and support the mast through any storm. With ropes and levers and a great deal of coordinated effort, they begin to raise the mast. It rises slowly, ponderously into the air. The men grunt and strain, their movements slow and deliberate. Leif directs them with quiet commands, his voice calm and steady. Finally, with a soft, solid thud, the base of the mast settles perfectly into the asterisk curling. A cheer goes up from the small crowd that has gathered to watch. The mast now stands tall and proud, pointing to the sky. It transforms the vessel. What was once a hollow shell is now undeniably a ship, a creature of wind and water, waiting for its sail, waiting for the sea. The days begin to shorten. The air grows crisper, and the leaves on the birch trees turn from green to a brilliant, shimmering gold. Autumn arrives, and with it, a sense of urgency. The ship must be finished before the first snows fall and the fjord freezes over. The final touches are added. The long steering oar or rudder is mounted on the starboard side. Benches for the oarsmen are fitted, and the intricate carving on the stem and stern posts is completed. Leif has not carved a dragon or a serpent. He has carved the gentle, swirling patterns of the wind and the waves, a tribute to the forces they hope to befriend on their journey. The work is hard, but it is joyful. There is a sense of community, of shared purpose. neighbors help Leif, and he, in turn, helps them mend their roofs or bring in their harvest. Life in the fjord is a web of interdependence, a quiet understanding that all are stronger together. Finally, the day comes. The toured wanderer is ready. The entire settlement gathers on the shore. The ship has been coated in a final layer of dark, protective tar, and it gleams in the low autumn sun. Astrid's beautiful sail is bent to the yard arm, folded and tied for now, but its bright colors are a promise of the journey to come. The ship sits high on the shore, resting on a bed of greased logs that run down into the water. With great levers and the strength of many shoulders, the ship begins to move. It groans at first, the sound of a sleeper waking. Then, slowly, inch by inch, it slides down the logs. It gathers speed, and with a final, graceful rush, it meets the water. There is a gentle splash, a sigh of displaced water, and then it floats. It floats perfectly, sitting high and light on the water, bobbing gently, as if giving a nod of greeting to the fjord. A hush falls over the people on the shore. They look at the ship, a creation of their own hands, of their own forest, now alive on the water. It is a moment of profound, quiet magic. Leif stands in the shallows, his hand resting on the hull, feeling the life of the ship as it moves with the water for the first time. Astrid stands beside him, her hand on his arm. Bjorn and Freya splash in the shallows, their faces filled with awe. The fjord wanderer is born. But its journey will have to wait. The days are growing shorter still, and the winds are turning cold. Winter is coming. It is a time for rest, for stories, for waiting for the world to turn once more towards the sun. The ship will spend its first winter moored safely in the quiet harbor, its wood becoming accustomed to the water, its spirit settling, dreaming, like the people who built it, of the wide, open sea and the promise of a new spring. The long, dark months of winter descended upon Stillhaven. The sun became a shy visitor, peeking over the southern mountain for only a few hours each day before retreating again, leaving the fjord in a prolonged twilight of soft blues and grays. Snow fell, thick and silent, blanketing the landscape in a deep, pristine white. The waterfalls froze into magnificent, glittering sculptures of ice. The fjord itself did not freeze completely, but a thin sheet of ice crept out from the shores, crackling softly in the profound stillness. The world grew quiet, turning inward. This was not a time of hardship, but a time of transformation. The work of the outdoors, farming, fishing, building, was replaced by the work of the indoors. The longhouse became the warm, beating heart of the family's world. The longhouse of Leif and Astrid was a single, large room, long and rectangular. The walls were thick timber, and the roof, covered in turf and now a heavy blanket of snow, provided excellent insulation. Down the center of the earthen floor ran a long, stone-lined hearth. There was no chimney, only a hole in the roof above the fire, through which the smoke could escape. The smoke stained the rafters a deep, glossy black and filled the air with the comforting, ever-present scent of wood smoke, a smell that clung to their clothes, their hair, and their memories. Life was lived around this central fire. It was the source of light, of warmth, and of cooked food. In the evenings, its flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the familiar space feel magical and mysterious. The family's sleeping benches, covered in warm furs and heavy woolen blankets, lined the long walls. During the day, these benches were used for sitting, for working, and for storytelling. Leif spent his days maintaining his tools, sharpening his axes and knives until they had a razor's edge, rubbing linseed oil into the handles of his adzes and planes to keep the wood from cracking in the dry indoor air. He mended nets and carved household items, new bowls from birch burls, a set of gaming pieces for a board game called Hinnefatafel, a new, more ornate shuttle for Astrid's loom. His hands were never idle, but their movements were unhurried, each action deliberate and mindful. Astrid's loom was now inside the longhouse, and the rhythmic thump-clack of her weaving was the steady heartbeat of their winter days. She taught Freya the simple art of drop spindling, how to take a tuft of raw wool and twist it into a strong, continuous thread. Freya's first threads were lumpy and uneven, but Astrid praised her effort, her voice as warm as the firelight. "All long journeys begin with a single wobbly step," she would say, her fingers guiding her daughters. Bjorn sat with his father, learning to use a small knife to carve. Leif gave him a block of soft pine and showed him how to make long, careful strokes, always carving away from his body. Bjorn's first project was a small, simple boat, a miniature of the asterisk Fjord Wanderer. He spent hours on it, his tongue sticking out from the corner of his mouth in concentration, the pile of fragrant shavings growing at his feet. But the most treasured time of the winter days was the evening, after the last meal had been eaten and the chores were done. The family would draw close to the hearth, the children wrapped in soft furs. The wind might howl outside, and the snow might drift high against the door, but inside, all was safe and warm. This was the time for stories. Leif was the storyteller. His voice was not loud or dramatic, but low and steady, like the hum of the wind in a ship's rigging. He did not just tell stories, he wove them, painting pictures with his words, making the ancient myths feel as real and present as the crackling fire before them. "Tonight," he began one evening, as Bjorn and Freya settled down, their eyes wide and luminous in the firelight, "I will tell you of the beginning of all things. Before there were gods, before there was Midgard where we live, before there was a sun or a moon, there was nothing but a great, yawning emptiness. This emptiness was called Ginnungagap." He paused, letting the weight of that word, that idea, settle in the quiet room. Imagine a silence so deep you could hear the beating of your own heart. Imagine a darkness so complete that it was not just the absence of light, but a thing in itself. That was Ginnungagap. But it was not entirely empty. To the north, a realm of ice and frost and fog took shape. It was called Niflheim. From its heart flowed 11 great, venomous rivers, their waters freezing as they flowed out into the emptiness. To the south, a realm of fire and heat came into being. It was called Muspelheim. It was a place of eternal light, of sparks and molten rock, guarded by the giant Surtur with his flaming sword. Leif leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Slowly, over ages and ages, the cold mists of Niflheim drifted south, and the hot sparks of Muspelheim drifted north. They met in the middle of Ginnungagap, and where the fire met the ice, a great magic happened. The ice began to melt. The drops of water, quickened by the heat, fell through the emptiness and coalesced, forming the shape of a giant. This was the first living being, and his name was Ymir. He was not good or evil. He was simply the beginning of life, born of the elemental forces of fire and ice. Freya snuggled closer to Astrid. "Was he all alone?" she asked, her voice small. Leif smiled. Not for long. As Ymir slept, he began to sweat, and from the sweat under his left arm, a male and a female frost giant grew. From his legs, another giant was born. These were the ancestors of all the frost giants. And as more ice from Niflheim melted, another creature was formed from the life-giving drops. This was a great, hornless cow named Audhumla. Her milk flowed in 4 great rivers, and this milk was the food that sustained Ymir. Bjorn, who loved animals, was fascinated. "A cow made of ice? What did she eat, father?" "A very good question," Leif said, his eyes twinkling. Audhumla found her own sustenance. She began to lick the salty, rime-covered ice blocks that filled the void. For one whole day she licked a single block of ice, and by the evening a man's hair had appeared. On the second day she licked some more, and a man's head was revealed. By the end of the third day the entire being had been freed from the ice. He was tall and beautiful. His name was Buri, and he was the first of the gods, the ancestor of Odin. Leif described how Buri had a son named Bor, who married a giantess named Besla. Together they had 3 sons: Odin, the oldest and wisest; Vili, who gave shape and will; and Ve, who gave warmth and the senses. These 3 brothers, Leif continued, his gaze distant as if seeing the events unfold in the flames, saw that the great void of Ginnungagap was filled with the brutish frost giants, the children of Ymir. They knew that for a more beautiful, ordered world to be created, a great change was needed. So they joined together and battled the giant Ymir. After a great struggle, they defeated him. Leif told this part of the story not as a tale of violence, but as a necessary act of creation, like felling a great tree to build a home. When Ymir fell, so much blood, which was the water of the world, flowed from his body that it created a great flood, and all the frost giants drowned, except for one, Bergelmir and his wife, who escaped in a wooden chest and sailed to the edge of the world to found a new land for their kind, Jotunheim. Then Odin and his brothers began their great work of creation. They were the world's first and greatest craftsmen. They took the immense body of Ymir, and from it they fashioned the world we know. His flesh became the earth, the soil, and the clay. His bones they piled up to become the mountains. His teeth and smaller bone fragments became the rocks and stones. His blood became the vast oceans, the lakes, and the rivers. He gestured to the smoke hole in the roof, through which a few bright stars could be seen against the inky blackness. They took his skull and raised it high above the earth to form the dome of the sky. To hold it up, they placed 4 dwarves at the 4 corners of the world: Nordri in the north, Sudri in the south, Austri in the east, and Westri in the west. Then they took sparks and embers that had flown from Muspelheim, the land of fire, and they threw them up into the inside of the skull, where they became the sun, the moon, and all the stars you see at night. From Ymir's brain they created the clouds, and from his eyebrows they built a great wall, a fortification to protect the beautiful lands they had made. This land, the world of humankind, they called Midgard, the middle yard. The children were silent, captivated by the immense, poetic vision of the world being built from the body of a giant. It made the mountains outside their door feel like the bones of the earth, the sea and the fjord like its very lifeblood. But Midgard was empty, Leif said softly. It was beautiful, with mountains and rivers, plains and forests, but there was no one to appreciate it, no one to live in it. One day, the 3 brothers, Odin, Vili, and Ve, were walking along the seashore. They found 2 pieces of driftwood that had washed ashore. One was from an ash tree, the other from an elm. Odin, the Allfather, breathed into them the spirit of life. Vili gave them the gift of intelligence and movement, and Ve gave them the senses, the ability to see, to hear, to speak. And so the wood was transformed. They became the first man and the first woman. The man, from the ash tree, they named Ask. The woman, from the elm tree, they named Embla. They were the ancestors of all of us, and the gods gave them Midgard to be their home, a place to build, to love, and to live. Leif fell silent. The only sound was the crackle and pop of the fire. The story was over, but its resonance filled the longhouse. It was a story that connected them to everything, to the wood of their home, to the mountains and the sea, to the very stars in the sky. On another long winter's night, when the wind moaned around the eaves of the longhouse, Freya asked, "Father, you told us how Midgard was made, but where do the gods live? And what holds all the worlds together?" Leif smiled, pleased with her question. He added a log to the fire, sending a shower of bright orange sparks up towards the smoke hole. "That," he said, his voice taking on a tone of reverence, is the story of the greatest tree of all, the world tree, Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil is a mighty ash tree, so vast that its branches spread out over all of the 9 worlds, and its leaves touch the very heavens. Its trunk is the pillar that supports the universe. It is the life of the cosmos, and its health is tied to the health of all that is. It was never planted, and it will never die as long as the worlds exist. It simply is. The tree has 3 great roots that hold it firm. Each root reaches into a different world, and each is nourished by a sacred well. The first root digs deep into Asgard, the home of the Aesir gods, the world of Odin and Thor. Beside this root is the well of Erd, a pool of water so pure and sacred that anything that touches it becomes as white as the inside of an eggshell. Here live 3 wise women, the Norns. Their names are Erd, which means what once was, Verdandi, what is coming into being, and Skuld, what shall be. They are the weavers of fate. They sit at the base of the great tree, spinning the threads of life for every being in all the worlds, gods and humans alike. Every day they take water from the sacred well and mix it with clay, and they spread this over the root of Yggdrasil to keep it from withering, to keep its bark from rotting. They protect the past, and by doing so, they ensure the future. Leif's voice was hypnotic, and the children could almost see the 3 ancient figures, their faces hidden in shadow, their hands endlessly weaving the destiny of all things. The second root, he continued, reaches down into Jotunheim, the land of the frost giants. Beside this root is the well of Mimir. Mimir is the wisest being in all the cosmos, and his well is the source of all knowledge and wisdom. The water of this well gives understanding of all things. Even Odin, the All-Father, who sought knowledge above all else, traveled to this well. He asked Mimir for a single drink. But Mimir knew the value of his well, and he demanded a great price. Odin had to sacrifice one of his own eyes, dropping it deep into the water, before Mimir would allow him to drink. And so Odin, with only one eye to see the world outside, gained the inner vision to understand all its secrets. This part of the story always filled Bjorn with a quiet awe. It wasn't about a fight, but about a choice, a sacrifice made for something greater. And the third root, Leif said, his voice lowering slightly, goes down into the cold darkness of Niflheim, the realm of mist and fog. Beneath this root is the spring of Hvergelmir, the source of the 11 frozen rivers from the beginning of time. And here, at the very bottom of the world, a dreadful dragon named Nidhogg gnaws relentlessly at the root. He is a force of decay, constantly trying to undo the work of creation, to bring the great tree down. "Will he succeed?" whispered Freya, her eyes wide. "He is always trying," Leif answered calmly. "But Yggdrasil is strong, and life is a balance of creation and destruction. While Nidhogg gnaws from below, other creatures live in the branches of the great tree. High, high up in the topmost boughs, so high that no one can see him, sits a great eagle. He is wise and sees everything that happens in the 9 worlds. And on his brow sits a hawk, observing even more. A squirrel, named Ratatoskr, scurries up and down the trunk of Yggdrasil. He is a messenger, but he loves to stir up trouble. He carries insulting words from the dragon Nidhogg at the bottom, up to the eagle at the top, and then he carries the eagle's angry replies back down again. He represents the strife and misunderstanding that can exist in the world, and 4 great stags, or hearts, roam among the highest branches, nibbling at the leaves and buds. Their names are Din, Dvalin, Dunir, and Durathror. Like Nidhogg, they represent a kind of gentle, constant consumption, the way that nature is always feeding upon itself. And as they graze, dew drips from their antlers, falling down to the worlds below, and this dew becomes the source of all the rivers in Midgard. Leif paused, letting the image of the great living tree settle in their minds. It was an entire ecosystem, a universe teeming with life from the dragon at its root to the eagle at its crown. Yggdrasil is the road between the worlds, he explained. Its trunk connects our Midgard to Asgard above and the other worlds around us. The Bifrost, a shimmering, quivering rainbow bridge, is the path the gods use to travel from Asgard down to Midgard. It is guarded by the ever-watchful god Heimdall. "So you see," Leif concluded, his hand resting on the wooden wall of their longhouse, "this very wood that keeps us warm, the trees that gave us our home and our ship, they are all small children of the great Yggdrasil. The ash tree is sacred. It connects us all. When you hear the wind rustling in the leaves of a tree, you are hearing a whisper of the great world tree, a reminder that we are all part of something much, much larger than ourselves. Our lives are just one tiny leaf on one small branch of that immense tree." And so the winter passed, in the warmth of the fire, in the rhythm of craft, and in the magic of stories. The tales of creation and of the world tree were not just entertainment. They were a way of understanding the world. They taught the children that the world was a place of balance, of interconnectedness, of deep and ancient magic. They learned that sacrifice could lead to wisdom, that creation required transformation, and that even in the deepest, darkest winter, the roots of the great tree held firm, promising the return of life, promising the coming of spring. And in their dreams they sailed not on the dark waters of the fjord, but among the star-dusted branches of Yggdrasil itself. The first sign of the coming change was subtle. It was not a sudden warmth, but a shift in the quality of the light. The deep violet twilight of midwinter began to soften at the edges, lingering a little longer each afternoon. The sun, which had been a distant, pale coin in the southern sky, began to climb a little higher each day, its rays gaining a faint, tentative warmth. Then came the sound, a soft, persistent dripping from the eaves of the longhouse as the snow on the roof began its slow melt. It was the sound of winter's grip loosening. Soon, the great frozen waterfalls on the fjord cliffs began to weep, then to trickle, and finally to roar back to life, their voices a triumphant chorus announcing the return of spring. The world awoke. The ice on the fjord cracked and groaned, breaking up into a mosaic of floating pieces that chimed against each other like delicate bells. The snow receded from the lower slopes, revealing the pale, flattened grass of the previous year, which soon began to show hesitant shoots of green. The birch trees, which had stood like stark, white skeletons against the snow, began to blush with a reddish tinge as their buds swelled. For Leif's family, it was a time of renewed energy. They threw open the door of the longhouse, letting the fresh, cool air, smelling of damp earth and melting snow, flood the smoky interior. They moved their work back outdoors, blinking in the strengthening sunlight. The turban-fired wanderer had weathered the winter well, her dark hull a stark, beautiful shape against the bright water. Now the final preparations for the journey could begin. The ship needed to be provisioned. This was a task for the whole community, a testament to their interconnected lives. Leif's neighbors helped him load the ballast, heavy, smooth stones from the riverbed, placed low in the ship's belly to give it stability in the rolling sea. They brought gifts for the journey, sacks of hardy seed grain, smoked and salted fish packed in barrels, wheels of hard cheese sealed in wax, and casks of fresh water and ale. Astrid, with Freya as her small shadow, supervised the loading of the domestic supplies. She packed her loom, carefully disassembled, for she would need it to weave new cloth in their new home. She packed chests with their woolen clothes and furs, bags of dried herbs for cooking and for medicine, and her precious weaving tools. She also packed the stories of their people, a small, intricately carved box holding a few precious rune stones, each one a symbol, a key to the old tales. Bjorn's job was to help his father with the ship's rigging. He learned the name and purpose of every rope. He learned to tie the essential knots, the bowline that would not slip, the clove hitch that held fast to a post. His hands, small but nimble, grew confident as he coiled ropes and secured lines. He felt a thrill every time he was on the deck of the fjord wanderer. The gentle rock of the ship on the water felt like the breathing of a living creature. The days were filled with purposeful activity, but the evenings retained their quiet magic. They did not need the fire for warmth now, but they would often sit on the shore as the sun set late, painting the sky with strokes of rose and gold. They watched the fjord wanderer floating at her mooring, her tall mast a dark finger pointing towards the star-dusted heavens. The talk was of the journey ahead. Leif, using a stick to draw on the damp sand, showed Bjorn how they would navigate. "We will follow the coast north for a time," he explained, his voice calm and reassuring. "We will keep the land on our right hand, a familiar friend. But then we must turn west into the open sea. Then we will have new guides." He pointed up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "We have the sun by day. We know that in the morning it is in the east, at midday it is in the south, and in the evening it is in the west. This gives us our direction. But at night we have an even more reliable friend." He pointed to the star that shone brightest in the north. "That is the North Star. It does not move as the other stars do. It is our fixed point, our anchor in the sky. As long as we can see it, we will know which way is north, and we will not be lost." He also spoke of other signs. The flight of seabirds which fly out to sea in the morning to feed and return to land at dusk. The color and pattern of the waves. The shape of the clouds. Even the presence of certain types of fish or whales could tell a skilled navigator that land was near. It was a language of nature, and Leif had spent his life learning to read it. Finally, the day of departure arrived. It was a morning of breathtaking beauty. The air was still, and the fjord was a perfect mirror, reflecting the mountains in the pale blue sky. A light mist hovered over the water, giving the scene a dreamlike quality. The whole settlement came down to the shore to say their farewells. There were no tears, only quiet handclasps, warm embraces, and words of encouragement. They were sad to see their friends go, but they understood the call of the horizon. It was a part of their spirit. Leif and Astrid and the children waded out to the small boat that would take them to the fjord wanderer. They climbed aboard, the wood cool and solid beneath their feet. Their kinsmen cast off the mooring lines. The ship was free. There was no wind. The great red and white sail remained furled around the yardarm. Leif and two cousins, who were joining them on the first leg of the journey, took up the long, heavy oars. With slow, powerful strokes they began to row. The oars bit into the glassy water, and the fjord wanderer began to move, gliding silently away from the shore, its wake two spreading silvery wings on the surface of the fjord. Bjorn and Freya stood at the rail, watching their home, the only home they had ever known, grow smaller. They saw the figures of their friends and neighbors standing on the shore, a small, silent gathering, until they were just specks in the distance. The longhouse with its green turf roof seemed to nestle back into the hillside, as if preparing to sleep. They rowed for hours, the rhythmic splash and pull of the oars the only sound in the great silence of the fjord. The high cliffs slid by, their familiar forms taking on a new, poignant beauty. They passed the waterfalls, their spray cool on their faces. They saw an eagle circling high above, its cry a lonely farewell. As they neared the mouth of the fjord, where it opened into the vastness of the sea, a breeze began to stir. It was a gentle but steady wind, coming from the land, as if to give them a final, gentle push out into the world. "Now," Leif said, his voice filled with a quiet excitement, "we will let the wind do the work." With practiced efficiency, they hoisted the yardarm. The great square sail, Astrid's masterpiece, unfurled and dropped down. For a moment, it flapped loosely. Then the wind caught it. The sail filled with a soft whoomp billowing out into a beautiful, taut curve. The fjord wanderer leaned slightly, and then it surged forward, picking up speed. The sound of the water rushing past the hull was a joyful, liberating song. They had reached the open sea. The world expanded around them, a seemingly endless expanse of water and sky. The mountains of their homeland were still visible behind them, a jagged blue line on the horizon. But ahead, There was nothing but the sea. Life settled into a new rhythm, dictated by the wind and the waves. The ship was their entire world. It was a small, self-contained universe of wood, wool, and human spirit, adrift in the immense wilderness of the ocean. The days were a gentle routine. Leif was the master of the ship, his hand steady on the long steering oar, his eyes constantly scanning the sea, the sky, the sail. He seemed to be in a constant, silent conversation with the elements, feeling the shifts in the wind, anticipating the movement of the waves. Astrid managed their small household, ensuring their food was rationed, their clothes were dry, and their spirits were high. She would often sit on a chest near the mast, her spindle in hand, spinning wool as the ship sailed, her movements as steady and rhythmic as the sea itself. Bjorn became his father's apprentice. He learned to read the wind by the feel of it on his cheek. He learned to trim the sail, adjusting the ropes to catch the wind most efficiently. He stood beside his father at the steering oar, learning how the ship responded to the slightest touch, how to guide it through the swell of the waves. The fear he had expected to feel was replaced by a profound sense of wonder and competence. He was not a passenger. He was part of the crew. Freya found her own place in this new world. She would lie on her stomach at the bow, watching the water part before the ship. She saw things the others missed. The shimmering jewel-like colors of jellyfish drifting just below the surface. The sleek, dark shapes of seals that would pop their heads up to look at the ship with curious liquid eyes. One afternoon, a great cry went up. "Whales!" Leif pointed to the horizon. Bjorn and Freya rushed to the side of the ship. In the distance, they saw a plume of spray shoot into the air, followed by another. Then they saw them. A pod of whales, immense and magnificent. They were far larger than the ship, their backs sleek and black, rising and falling in a slow, graceful rhythm. They did not seem to fear the ship, but swam alongside it for a time, their deep, sighing breaths echoing across the water. It was a moment of pure magic, a greeting from the deep, ancient life of the ocean. The nights were perhaps the most beautiful time of all. With no land to block the view, the sky was a vast dome of black velvet, scattered with a breathtaking profusion of stars. The Milky Way was a luminous river flowing across the heavens. Leif would show the children the constellations, the patterns that his own father had shown him. There was Thor's chariot, and the Great Bear, and the glittering belt of Orion the hunter. He showed them how to find the North Star, their constant, unwavering guide. They would huddle together under warm furs, the ship rocking gently beneath them like a cradle, the only sounds the creak of the timbers and the whisper of the water against the hull. The ship was alive, speaking its own language. The mast would groan under the strain of the wind, the ropes would hum a low tune, and the hull would flex and sigh with the movement of the waves. It was a deeply soothing lullaby. Not all was calm. They sailed through days of thick, disorienting fog, where the world shrank to a small circle of gray water around the ship. They could see nothing, and the silence was heavy and oppressive. In these times, Leif navigated by instinct, by the feel of the swell, and by an unshakable inner compass. He would remain calm, and his calmness spread to his family. They learned to be patient, to trust the ship and the sea. One night, a storm blew up. The sky turned a bruised purple-black, and the wind began to howl. The sea, which had been so gentle, became a chaos of towering, white-capped waves. The fjord wanderer was tossed about like a piece of driftwood. Waves crashed over the bow, sending sheets of cold spray across the deck. Leif and Astrid worked together seamlessly. They lowered the yardarm and took in most of the sail, leaving only a small patch of cloth to give them some control. Leif wrestled with the great steering oar, his body braced against the bucking of the ship, his face grim with concentration. He was not fighting the storm, he was dancing with it, using its own energy to keep the ship's bow pointed into the waves, preventing it from being turned broadside and swamped. Astrid secured everything on deck, lashing down chests and barrels. She took the children to the small, sheltered space in the stern, wrapped them in dry furs, and held them close. She did not speak of fear. Instead, she sang to them, her voice a low, steady hum against the roar of the wind. She sang old songs of the strength of the mountains, of the resilience of the oak tree. The storm raged for a whole day and a night. It was a terrifying, exhilarating display of the power of nature. But the ship, Leif's masterpiece, held strong. Its flexible hull bent and moved with the waves, its timbers groaning but never breaking. It was built for this. It was born of trees that had learned to bend in the wind. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the storm passed. The wind died down. The sea calmed, and the clouds broke apart. The sun shone through, making the wet deck gleam and turning the sea spray into 1,000 tiny rainbows. A sense of profound peace and exhaustion settled over them. They had faced the rage of the sea and had endured. Their trust in their ship and in each other had deepened into an unbreakable bond. They had been at sea for many weeks. The coast of Norway had long since vanished behind them. They were alone in the vastness of the Atlantic. They had sailed past the small islands to the north, the Shetlands and the Faroes, stopping only briefly for fresh water and to trade a few small items for eggs and mutton. Now they were in the final stretch of their journey, sailing west into the unknown. One morning, Bjorn, who was perched high on the yardarm keeping watch, let out a shout. "Land! I see land!" But it was not land. It was a cloud, a trick of the light. Their hearts, which had leaped with excitement, settled again. The waiting was the hardest part. They had to trust their navigation, trust the stories they had heard. Then, a few days later, a new sign appeared. A small, tired-looking bird, a land bird, not a sea bird, landed in the rigging of the ship. It rested for a while, its small heart beating visibly, before taking flight again, heading resolutely west. "He knows the way," Astrid said softly. "He is going home." Hope surged through them. The next day, they saw more birds, and then Leif, sniffing the air, detected a new scent on the wind. It was not the clean, salty smell of the open ocean. It was a faint, earthy smell, the smell of damp soil and growing things. That afternoon, Freya, who was trailing her hand in the water, pulled it out and held up a green leaf. It was a leaf from a birch tree, fresh and whole. It could not have been in the water for long. The anticipation was electric. No one slept that night. They all stood on deck, straining their eyes towards the western horizon, towards the place where the sun had set. And then, with the first, pale light of dawn, they saw it. At first, it was just a low, dark smudge on the horizon, darker than the sea, more solid than a cloud. But as the sun rose higher, it resolved itself into a long, low coastline. Above it, in the far distance, a great mountain rose, its peak covered in a cap of brilliant white ice that glowed pink in the morning sun. It was Iceland, the new land. A profound, reverent silence fell upon the ship. They had done it. They had crossed the great ocean. They had followed the sun and the stars and the whispers of the wind, and they had arrived. Leif wrapped his arm around Astrid, and they stood with their children, watching their future take shape before their eyes. The fjord wanderer had brought them home to a place they had never been before. The fjord wanderer sailed slowly along the coast, a tiny, man-made vessel against a landscape of immense and primal beauty. The land that unfolded before them was unlike anything they had ever known. It was a place of stark and dramatic contrasts. Towering cliffs of dark volcanic rock plunged directly into the churning sea. Great gray rivers of ancient lava flowed down from the mountains, frozen in time. In the distance, the immense white glaciers gleamed with an inner blue light, looking like castles of ice. But it was not a dead land. Nestled between the dark rock and the bright ice were valleys of an astonishing, vibrant green. Water was everywhere. Waterfalls, far larger and more powerful than the ones in their home fjord, thundered over the cliffs, their spray creating perpetual rainbows in the air. Hot springs steamed in the valleys, their misty plumes rising into the cool air, like the breath of the earth itself. The air was clean and sharp, so clear that the distant mountains seemed close enough to touch. There was a profound silence here, a silence that was not empty, but full of the immense, slow power of creation. For several days, they explored the coastline, searching for the right place to make their home. Leif was looking for the same things his ancestors had always looked for: a sheltered harbor to protect the ship, a source of fresh water, good grazing land for the few hardy sheep and the single cow they had brought with them, and access to wood. Wood was the most challenging part. This new land was not cloaked in the vast, ancient forests of Norway. Trees were sparse, mostly dwarf birch and willow that grew in sheltered valleys. But there was another kind of wood in abundance: driftwood, great logs torn from the forests of a distant land they did not know, had been carried across the ocean by the currents and washed up on the beaches. These sea-cured timbers, Leif knew, would be strong and perfect for building. Finally, they found it: a wide, shallow bay, protected from the worst of the ocean winds by a long, curving headland. A clear, fast-flowing river emptied into the bay, its water sweet and cold. Beyond the gravelly beach, the land rose into a gentle, grassy slope, a perfect place for a farmstead. And in the distance, a small forest of birch trees, huddled in the lee of a hill, promising a source of fuel and timber for smaller projects. With a deep sense of rightness, Leif steered the fjord wanderer into the bay and dropped the heavy stone anchor. The journey was over. The work was about to begin. Their first act upon setting foot on their new land was one of gratitude. Leif, Astrid, Bjorn, and Freya walked to the mouth of the river. Leif poured a small amount of ale onto the ground, an offering to the landvitir, the spirits of the land. He spoke aloud, his voice quiet but firm in the vast emptiness. He introduced his family, stated their peaceful intentions to live on the land, to care for it, and to ask for its blessing and protection in return. It was a simple ceremony, a quiet acknowledgement that they were guests in this ancient place. Their first home was a simple tent made from the ship's sail, which they waterproofed with fish oil. It was a temporary shelter, but it was enough. The first few weeks were a blur of ceaseless, joyful work. They unloaded the ship, carefully carrying their precious livestock, tools, and supplies to the shore. The first great task was to build a home, a longhouse that would protect them from the coming winter. They chose a spot on the grassy slope, facing south to catch the winter sun, with its back to the prevailing north wind. Leif, with Bjorn as his eager assistant, laid out the foundations, a long rectangle of stones. They spent weeks combing the beaches for the best driftwood logs, dragging the heavy waterlogged timbers back to the building site. Leif's axe and adze, which had been so quiet during the voyage, now sang their familiar song from dawn until dusk. He shaped the timbers, carving the mortise and tenon joints that would lock the frame of the house together without the need for a single iron nail. It was slow, painstaking work, but the frame that rose from the ground was immensely strong, built to withstand the fierce Icelandic winds. While Leif and Bjorn worked on the timber frame, Astrid and Freya had their own crucial task: building the walls. They cut thick squares of turf from the meadow, a technique they had learned in their old home. The turf was rich, with a dense network of roots that held the soil together. They laid these turf bricks in a herringbone pattern, creating walls that were incredibly thick and well insulated. As they worked, Astrid would point out the different flowers and herbs growing in the turf, teaching Freya their names and uses. The walls of their home were literally alive, a part of the land itself. Slowly, the longhouse took shape. It was smaller than their old home, but it felt entirely their own. Once the timber frame was up and the turf walls were complete, they laid a roof of driftwood rafters, covered it with a layer of birch bark for waterproofing, and then laid more turf on top. Soon, their new home looked like a gentle, green hill, a natural part of the landscape. Inside, it was a single, long room, just like their old house. They built a long hearth down the middle and sleeping platforms along the walls. The air smelled of fresh-cut wood, damp earth, and the sea. As autumn approached, the pace of work quickened. They needed to prepare for their first winter. Leif and Bjorn built a small, sturdy shelter for the animals. They fished relentlessly in the river and the sea, smoking and drying their catch on wooden racks. Astrid and Freya harvested the wild bounty of the land. They gathered hardy berries that grew low to the ground, collected edible seaweeds from the shore at low tide, and dug for the roots of angelica, a plant prized for both its flavor and its medicinal properties. They worked together, a small, tightly knit unit, their movements falling into a comfortable rhythm. In the evenings they were bone-weary, but it was a good weariness, the satisfying ache of productive labor. They would sit outside their nearly finished longhouse and watch the sky. Here, with no mountains to block the view as in their old fjord, the sky was immense. And at night, it came alive with a new and wondrous spectacle. The northern lights. They appeared as a faint, greenish shimmer at first, but then they would grow, swelling into great, silent curtains of light that rippled and danced across the entire sky. Swaths of green, pink, and pale violet would pulse and flow as if the heavens themselves were breathing. The children would watch, in wide-eyed, silent awe. "It is the Bifrost Bridge," Astrid whispered to them one night, her voice full of wonder. "It is the gods, riding across the sky from Asgard." It was a beautiful thought, and it made the vast, empty land feel less lonely, as if they were being watched over by the old, familiar powers. The day they moved into the longhouse was a milestone. They lit the first fire in the central hearth. The smoke curled upwards and found its way out of the smoke hole in the roof. The stone hearth radiated a deep, comforting warmth. They unrolled their sleeping furs on the platforms, and for the first time in months, they slept with a solid roof over their heads. The sound of the wind outside was a distant, muffled roar, and they felt utterly safe and secure. Winter arrived, and with it, the snow. The land was transformed once again, becoming a world of sweeping white and shadowed blue. But this winter was different from the ones they had known. It was not a time of hibernation, but of consolidation and creation. Inside the warm, smoky longhouse, life continued. Leif carved bowls, spoons, and furniture for their new home. He took Bjorn out onto the frozen river and taught him how to fish through a hole in the ice. Astrid set up her loom, and its familiar, rhythmic clatter once again became the heartbeat of their home. She taught Freya to weave, her small fingers learning to guide the shuttle, creating simple patterns of her own. They were weaving the fabric of their new life. In the long, dark evenings, they gathered around the fire, just as they always had, and Leif told stories. He told the old stories of Odin and Thor, of the creation of the world and the great tree Yggdrasil. The stories rooted them, connecting their new home to the ancient traditions of their people. They were a thread that stretched all the way across the wide ocean, back to the fjord they had left behind. But they also began to tell new stories, stories of their own journey, of the great whales that swam beside their ship, of the storm they had weathered, of the first time they saw the dancing lights in the sky. Bjorn carved a small model of the asterisk Fjord Wanderer, perfect in every detail. Freya wove a small tapestry, its threads showing a green land, a blue sea, and a sky filled with shimmering light. They were creating their own mythology, weaving their own lives into the fabric of this new place. Spring returned, just as it always did. The snow melted, the rivers swelled, and the land turned a vibrant, impossible green. Migratory birds returned in their thousands, their calls filling the air. The sheep and the cow had survived the winter, and now there were new lambs and a calf, the first generation to be born in this new land. Leif and Bjorn tilled a small patch of earth and planted the precious barley seeds they had carried all the way from Norway. They watched the green shoots push their way through the dark soil with a sense of profound wonder and accomplishment. One clear summer evening, the family walked to the top of the hill behind their farmstead. They looked out over the world they had built. Below them lay their longhouse, a plume of smoke rising from its roof. Their animals grazed peacefully on the green slope. The river flowed into the bay, where the asterisk fjord wanderer floated calmly at anchor, its journey done, its purpose fulfilled. The sun was setting over the western sea, the same sea they had crossed. It painted the sky and the water with soft, gentle colors. A sense of deep, quiet peace settled over them. They had not come here for wealth or for glory. They had come with a quiet dream, a dream of building a life with their own hands, of living in harmony with a new land, of seeing what lay beyond the horizon. Leif put his arms around his family. They were not Vikings, in the way the stories are sometimes told. They were farmers, builders, weavers, explorers. Their greatest treasures were their skills, their courage, and their stories. Their greatest conquest was not over any people, but over the vastness of the sea and the challenges of a new beginning. Here, on the edge of the known world, under the immense, silent sky, they had found their quiet harbor. They had planted their roots deep into the new soil, and they were home. And as the last sliver of the sun disappeared below the horizon, they stood together in the gentle twilight, listening to the sound of the wind and the water, their hearts filled with a quiet, enduring hope for all the seasons yet to come. Now rest. Let the peace of this new homestead, the gentle rhythm of their lives, and the vast, quiet landscape guide you into a deep and tranquil sleep. Dream of open seas and new beginnings, of skilled hands and warm hearts, and of the profound peace that can be found in building a home. Sleep now. Sleep well.